How do you suppose those ants managed to build on a poison strip where they absolutely cannot live?
Phase 4 is one of the most unusual science fiction films ever financed by a major Hollywood studio. A graphic designer in the director's chair for the first and last time. Real ants filmed with techniques nobody had used before. A psychedelic ending that Paramount cut and then lost for nearly 40 years. And a film that may have accidentally inspired one of the strangest phenomena in modern folklore. 1. The man behind the camera had never made a feature. Saul Bass was one of the most influential visual artists in Hollywood history. And he was not a filmmaker. He was a graphic designer. The title sequences he created for Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo and Psycho, Otto Preminger's Anatomy of a Murder, and Martin Scorsese's work decades later redefined what a film's opening minutes could be. He had also won an Academy Award for his 1968 short documentary, Why Man Creates. But he had never directed a feature film. Phase 4 was his first. The idea came from a casual conversation in 1971 between producer Paul B. Radden and a Paramount executive who suggested Bass as director. Bass agreed. He brought to the project a visual sensibility built from decades of design work, and absolutely no experience managing the scale of a feature production. It was also his last. He never directed another. 2. The whole thing started over cocktails. The origin of Phase 4 is one of the stranger commissioning stories in science fiction cinema. In 1971, producer Paul B. Radden had dinner with Peter Bart, then vice president of production at Paramount Pictures. Bart asked him what he was working on. Radden said he had an ant story. He had nothing, no script, no treatment, no outline, just the words. Bart liked it enough to suggest approaching Saul Bass to direct. Radden called Bass, who happened to have a friend who worked with ants professionally. The two agreed quickly to develop the project together. Screenwriter Mayo Simon was brought in to shape the premise into a script. A film that began as an improvised dinner table response eventually reached cinemas with a Paramount Pictures credit on it. 3. It was set in Arizona and shot in Africa. The film takes place in the Arizona desert. Not a single frame of principal exterior photography was shot there. The desert landscapes, the vast, arid expanse surrounding the research dome, the ant towers rising from the sand, were filmed in the Rift Valley of Kenya. Producer Paul B. Radden had previously made Born Free in Africa and still had contacts and logistical infrastructure there. Using Kenya was more practical and less expensive than the alternative. Interior scenes were shot at Pinewood Studios in England. A small amount of additional footage was captured in Eloy and Yuma, Arizona, to anchor the geography. But the overwhelming visual identity of the film, the heat, the isolation, the hostile landscape, belongs to East Africa, standing in without apology for the American Southwest. 4. The ant photographer was more important than the director of photography. Phase 4 has 2 credited cinematographers, and the more important one is the one most people have never heard of. Dick Bush was the film's primary director of photography. He was a respected professional who subsequently shot William Friedkin's Sorcerer and Ken Russell's Tommy. His work on Phase 4 is accomplished and controlled. But the sequences that define the film, the extreme close-ups of ant colonies operating with apparent intelligence, the time-lapse footage of coordinated insect behavior, the macro shots of individual ants navigating the frame, were the work of wildlife photographer Ken Middleham. He had previously shot the insect sequences for the Academy Award-winning documentary The Hellstrom Chronicle. On Phase 4, Middleham's footage operates as its own parallel film running beneath the human story. Bass later acknowledged that Middleham's contribution was as central to the finished product as anything he himself had directed. 5. The queen ants were actually wasps. The ant queens featured in the film's most striking close-up sequences, their enormous, pale, distended abdomens surrounded by attendant workers, are not ants. They are wasps. The practical reason was straightforward. Ant queens shed their wings during the mating phase and develop their large abdomens only during pregnancy. Keeping ant queens in the required condition for extended filming without causing them to enter breeding states or die was logistically unmanageable. Wasp queens were substituted instead. The physical similarity in close-up is close enough that the substitution is invisible on screen. The scientific inaccuracy went unnoticed by virtually every audience member and most critics. Middleham made the decision on practical grounds and simply worked around it. The illusion held completely. 6. Real mainframe computers were used instead of props. The laboratory dome where the two scientists operate their monitoring systems required equipment that looked convincingly technical and modern for 1974. Rather than building props or using dressed-up stage hardware, the production sourced real GEC 2050 mainframe computers for the interior scenes. Actual working mainframe equipment fills the dome sequences, lending the laboratory a functional authenticity that prop-built sets of the era rarely achieved. The decision was partly practical. Building convincing computing hardware to that scale would have consumed significant budget. But the result was a set that looked genuinely operational rather than theatrical. Critics who noticed little else about the film frequently acknowledged that the dome interior felt like a real scientific installation. 7. Bass designed. No title sequence for his own film. The most famous thing about Saul Bass, the reason his name was known at all outside the design world, was the film title sequences he had created over 2 decades. Phase 4 has no bass title sequence. The film opens with a straightforward sequence of narration over space imagery, with no trace of Bass's graphic sensibility in the credits. He also had no involvement in designing the theatrical release poster. The image of a hand with ants crawling from a wound in the palm, which became the film's most recognizable marketing image. The poster lifted imagery from the film, but was produced without Bass's input. The man who essentially invented the creative title sequence made a feature film with none. The irony was noted by critics at the time and has not diminished since. 8. The film invented the crop circle phase. 4 is widely cited as the first film in history to depict a geometric crop circle. The super-intelligent ant colony creates precise geometric formations in the desert. Circles, mathematical patterns pressed into the landscape as territorial markers and communication structures. They appear early in the film and are treated as evidence of the ants' evolved intelligence rather than as spectacle. The film was released in 1974. The first widely reported modern crop circle formations in England appeared in 1976, 2 years later. Researchers and film historians have cited Phase 4 as a possible influence on the individuals who began creating the formations, planting the visual concept in popular culture before the phenomenon existed in the real world. The geometric ant formations in the film predate the phenomenon they may have helped inspire. 9. The lead actress was forced into a painful corset. Lynn Frederick was 20 years old when she was cast as Kendra, a character written as a 16-year-old teenager. Bass was aware of the discrepancy and concerned about it visibly affecting the credibility of the performance. His solution was a specially designed ironclad corset, which Frederick was required to wear throughout the entire production. The device was designed to flatten and bind her figure to make her appear younger and less physically developed. Frederick later described it as painful. Bass also reportedly attempted to persuade her to restrict her diet to chicken broth and black coffee during filming, though accounts of how far this was enforced vary. Both the corset and the dietary pressure reflect a production culture around actresses that would be unacceptable today. Frederick was an experienced professional working under deeply uncomfortable physical conditions throughout the shoot. 10. The ending was cut and then lost for nearly 40 years. This is the hidden story at the center of Phase 4. Bass had filmed a psychedelic 4 to 6 minute montage sequence as the film's climax, the actual Phase 4 of the title, depicting the merging of human and ant consciousness into a new evolved species. People running through mazes, faces dissolving, waves crashing, a woman giving birth to a child while ants crawl from a wound. The sequence was abstract, disturbing, and completely consistent with the visual language Bass had built across the rest of the film. Paramount cut it entirely before release. They replaced it with a truncated ending that implied the transformation without depicting it. Bass delivered his final cut. The studio made the change over his objections, and the footage vanished. For nearly 4 decades, cinephiles knew it had existed from brief descriptions in film reference books and from glimpses visible in the theatrical trailer, which had been cut before the studio's intervention. The footage itself was considered lost. 11. The lost ending was found in an archive in 2012. In early 2012, archivists at the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences were working through the Saul Bass collection, materials donated to the Academy Film Archive, when they found a faded print of Bass's original ending in a preview version of the film that had been shown to test audiences in 1973. The original film elements, separation masters, were subsequently located in Paramount's own archives. The Academy Film Archive recombined the separations, color-timed them, and had them digitally scanned. In June 2012, the restored ending was screened publicly for the first time since that 1973 preview at the Cinefamily Cinematheque in Los Angeles, following a full showing of the theatrical cut. In December 2012, it premiered at the Alamo Drafthouse in Austin as part of a full day of Bass's work. Bass himself had died in 1996, 16 years before the ending he had made, and Lost was finally seen again. 12. The theatrical trailer contained the cut footage. The evidence that the Lost ending existed had been hiding in plain sight for decades. Paramount prepared the theatrical trailer for Phase 4 before the studio's final intervention and editing decisions were made. As a result, the trailer contains brief glimpses of imagery drawn directly from Bass's cut ending. Abstract montage footage that does not appear anywhere in the version of the film that reached cinemas. Anyone who watched the trailer closely and then saw the theatrical release would have noticed sequences that promised something the finished film didn't deliver. The discrepancy was documented in film reference books as early as the 1970s. The book Future Tense specifically described Bass having filmed a surreal montage that was cut by the distributor. The trail was always there. The footage itself took nearly 40 years longer to surface. 13. The film predates Beyond the Black Rainbow by decades. Phase 4's reputation rested for a long time almost entirely on cult television airings and a brief, infamous appearance on Mystery Science Theater 3000 during its early KTMA cable access season in 1989. Then a new generation of filmmakers found it. Writer-director Panos Cosmatos cited Phase 4 as a direct and significant influence on his science fiction film Beyond the Black Rainbow, a deliberately hypnotic, visually abstract piece that shares Phase 4's interest in isolation, transformation, and psychological disorientation over conventional narrative. The connection is visible to anyone who watches both films. Bass's approach, using geometric imagery, extreme close-up, and deliberate pacing to create dread without conventional action, anticipated an entire strain of cerebral art house science fiction that would not become a recognized movement until decades after Phase 4 was written off as a flop. 14. The film nearly soured Bass on directing permanently. Phase 4's production experience was damaging enough that Bass never returned to feature filmmaking. The conflict with Paramount over the ending, delivering a finished cut, and having its central sequence removed over his objections, was the most visible wound. But the production itself had been difficult. Bass was a graphic artist accustomed to controlling every visual element of his work. Feature filmmaking at studio scale involved compromises, time pressure, and collaborative decision-making that sat uneasily with his working methods. He continued designing title sequences after Phase 4, eventually producing some of his most celebrated work for Scorsese on Goodfellas, Casino, and Cape Fear. But the feature film career that Phase 4 was supposed to launch simply never materialized. The studio took his ending. He took the lesson and went back to what he had always done best. 15. The Ants won. Phase 4 was marketed as a creature feature. The poster sold horror. The studio positioned it as a thriller about killer insects. What Bass actually made was a philosophical science fiction film about the limits of human intelligence in the face of collective consciousness, and about what it might mean for humanity to surrender its individuality to something larger. The ants in the film don't lose. They don't get destroyed in a climax. They complete their plan. The humans are absorbed, altered, made part of something they cannot understand. It arrived 2 years after 2001, in a decade saturated with paranoia and institutional distrust. It should have found its audience. Instead, it played the bottom half of double bills, disappeared from cinemas quickly, and waited. Decades of television airings, a mystery science theater appearance, a rediscovered ending, and a generation of filmmakers who cited it as foundational eventually gave it the reputation it never earned in 1974. The ants, in the end, were patient. So was the film. A graphic designer who made one film, an ending cut, lost and found 4 decades later, hiding in an archive. A crop circle nobody planned to invent. Phase 4 didn't fail because it was bad. It failed because the studio never understood what it was. Drop the fact that hit hardest in the comments below. And subscribe. The next overlooked film is already waiting.